Welcome back to the course titled Strategic Communication for Sustainable Development. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. And today in this lecture we will discuss the systems approach to identifying decisive information for sustainable development, and this is based on a paper by Kelly. So I will give you the complete reference of this paper as we move on. And according to this perspective, the first thing we do when we try to design a communication strategy for sustainable development is we try to analyze the situation, and in doing that we first try to find out what is sustained. So you'll say, okay, we are talking about communication, but we are moving in all directions. We are talking about stakeholders, we are talking about strategy, we are talking about risk, we are talking about corporate communications. Now not a lot of literature exists on the application of the principles of strategic communication to sustainable development situations, and that is an attempt I'm making through this course. I'm trying to bring all of these things together. So in this strategy, has been discussed in the context, specifically in the context of sustainable development. So what do we do here? The first thing we do is analyze the situation, and in analyzing the situation we ask some questions. The first thing we ask is, what is this animal called sustainability? What is being sustained? What are we trying to sustain? Why are we trying to sustain it? How are we going to measure this concept of sustainability? What are the politics involved? Who is going to influence whom, and how and why? So what all will be the dynamics of the communication processes that will be going on in the community when we are having this discussion about sustainability? What are we trying to do here? That is a big chunk. That is the analysis of the situation, and that is step one of this process. When we talk about what is being sustained and how to measure sustainability, we look for indicators, we look for things, we look for concepts and ideas, we look for markers that will help us measure the impact of what we are trying to do here. So we look for indicators within the community, and some characteristics of indicators as instruments of information regarding sustainability. So when we ask the question, what is being sustained, why is it being sustained, why are we talking about it, what are we going to measure, we are looking for information regarding sustainability. And how do we identify this information? We identify it through indicators. And how do we know what is an indicator of sustainability? We look for concepts and ideas that are user driven. So the indicators that we choose for identifying as instruments of information regarding sustainability need to be user driven. They must be useful to their audience. The indicators must be policy relevant. They must be pertinent to the policy concerns. They must feed into the policy. They must be relevant to the policies or to the issues that drive the formulation of policies, to the issues to what the policies are going to influence. They must be highly aggregated. So when we look for indicators, there could be many indicators. Excuse me. There could be many indicators of sustainable development in bits and pieces, at the micro level and at the macro level. There could be many indicators. What we need to do is we need to categorize these indicators and come up with aggregated categories. The final indices, the final categories of indicators that are measurable should be few in number, and these are some of the characteristics of indicators that we will use for information as instruments of information regarding sustainable development. So in a previous class I told you that I am not very comfortable with the idea of sustainable development being measured, but in order to satisfy our stakeholders, who are the people who are going to fund the sustainable development efforts, we have to have some measurable outcomes. And how do we assess these measurable outcomes? By first assessing what is out there, what is a problem, quantifying this gap or this problem, and then doing something about it, and then measuring what we have done in terms of assessing the situation in quantified terms, and saying this is the number. For example, let's take education. In a village, on an average, from the year 1990 to 2000, on an average 12% girls were going to the school every year. 12% of the girls were graduating with a class 10 certificate from the local high school. From the year 2000 to 2010, because of this intervention, so we said, okay, why are these girls going? We go in, we find out why only 12% of the girls in the village are coming out with a class 10 certificate. We go and find out that parents don't want to send the girls don't get time to study, etc. Some interventions are put in, somebody funds these interventions, somebody goes and educates families, and then because of these efforts, the number of people, the number of girls who come out with class 10 certificates goes up to say 20%. I'm just taking a hypothetical example here. That is a measurable indicator. It is user driven. It is going to be useful to the intended audience. So the person who is funding the effort wants to know ultimately what will happen or how will their efforts benefit the community, and this is how their efforts will benefit the community. The problem was fewer girls are coming out with class 10 certificates. As a result of the money that was pumped in, as a result of the efforts that were put in, the number went up. In the next 10 years, the number went up from 12% to 20%. You will say this is a very, very pessimistic understanding. I would say that this is a very realistic sort of example here. Okay, they must be policy relevant. So if an intervention has helped, the intervention is to maybe build schools closer to the homes of the girls, to have a bus service only for girls from every village or from the village square to the nearest school, and just by plying those buses, which is a doable thing. Okay, so these things are policy relevant. Policy cannot drive how parents treat their children. Policy cannot drive what the girls do in their homes. Policy can definitely drive the facilities that are provided to the children in the schools that can make their lives easier. So various problems must be contributing to girls not finishing their class 10 certificates. Various problems must be there. Number of siblings, parents need help, girls are told right from the time they're born that they have to get married, look after somebody else's home. So that is being discussed in the house, and at that time we can't interfere with those things. We'll say we'll have social workers going and raising awareness, but we still cannot control what goes on or what kind of discussion goes on in the families of these children. But we can definitely provide facilities. One of the problems that is visible there is less of, let's say, this is just a hypothetical example, that there are fewer buses. Parents are concerned about the safety of their girl children. They say we don't want our children to walk 4 or 5 kilometers on their own. So the government says, okay, this is where we can help. So the policy is to ensure that there is some form of safe public transportation, maybe a bus driven by a woman bus driver, so that parents feel comfortable and safe. And so the bus takes the girl children from the village square where parents come and drop them. They go in that bus to the nearest school, they are brought back in the same bus. And not only that, attendance is taken when they board the bus, and it is taken when they get off the bus. The conductor maintains a record of who is in the bus at any given point of time. That is an implementable policy. Okay, so policy relevant, highly aggregated. So a lot of problems. So we say, okay, parents have this discussion, that discussion, you know, there's a problem of facilities. We categorize these facilities, put one group of, we categorize the problems, put one group of problems into, say, family discussions. The other group of problems is facilities for transportation. The third group of problems is schools or electricity in schools. Fourth group of problems is provision of school supplies. So it's not books and pens and pencils and notebooks and computers come much later, but you know, drinking water and bathroom, it's just school facilities. So we know what we can use as an indicator. Okay. All right. Criteria for successful indicator initiatives. When we talk about indicators, we are talking about, you know, putting in some or identifying things that can help us, or identifying ideas that can help us point out exactly what we need to do and where and how much. So how do we identify these indicators? We define the indicator sets through public participation or public stakeholder consultation. I want to do these things. Maybe I have the power and authority and the money to do these things, but I am not part of the community that I want to help. I live in a different kind of setup. So what do I need to do? I may be an expert. I may have published millions of papers or hundreds of papers. I may be well known in my field, but I may not be a part of the community that I'm going to go in and help. Excuse me. So what do? I go and talk to the people. The first thing for finding out what an indicator or what kinds of indicators we should use is going and talking to the concerned people and taking their advice, taking their suggestions, asking for their inputs on identifying these indicator sets. Then provision of indicator profiles that cover both ecological as well as socio-economic dimensions. So we find out what kinds of indicators we are looking at, and then we pick the ones that cover a larger ground. Institutionalization of the indicator initiative in terms of effective laws and regulations, assignment of data collection, monitoring and report preparation responsibilities, and regular reporting. Now this is very essential. Now I am actually coming to the nuts and bolts of implementing sustainable development strategies through effective communication. We need to take our efforts and formalize them. We need to depute people. We need to tell people what we want from their efforts. So we identify the initiative. We put laws and regulations and policies in place, and we depute people to collect data, and we depute people to monitor and prepare reports, monitor the data collection and prepare reports, and we ensure that the reporting happens on a regular basis so that the indicators are formalized and the results are visible to us. Integration of indicators into the decision process. We collect all this data, we write papers, we publish papers, people do their PhDs. So yes, we get lots of money to do this, but what happens ultimately? We write reports, and then the reports just gather dust in some office. Sometimes this happens. Sometimes the data, the report actually reaches the person who can make a decision based on the reports that are generated as a result of all the efforts that have gone in. And at that time, that report can help influence the future policies. So the example that I was telling you, I think it's already been done in some places. But something like this, we collect the data, we find out how many children are not going to school because of lack of adequate transportation facilities. We keep a record, we maintain documents, we find out, we talk to people, we reinforce, whatever we thought was happening is reinforced. We put a bus in place, we see the attendance going up, we see the participation going up, we see the pass result going up, we see these children being gainfully employed in professions outside of their villages, coming back to help their villages. So we have mountains of data that we use, and then we say, okay, this one initiative helped raise the quality or the inclination to go in for formal education in this particular village. So it should be integrated into the system, and the next time it's not a policy decision, it's not a matter of policy or an experiment, it is a decision for that area. So it starts with an experiment and then it becomes a final decision for that area. Okay. Pressure state response framework for developing environmental indicators. So we find out what is happening to the questions that we ask for developing environmental indicators are: what is happening to the state of the environment or natural resources? Why is it happening? What are we doing about it? 3 things. What is the concern at hand right now? Pressure state. Why are we concerned about it? What is happening? What is bothering us? And then we find out the reason for whatever it is disturbing us as far as the environment is concerned. And then we ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? This seems pretty logical. This is called as the pressure state response framework. We identify the pressure state, we identify whatever it is that is causing us discomfort, and we respond to it. Now, in all of this, you must have seen whatever I have discussed till now, right from the beginning. I've talked about participation, I've talked about community, I've talked about getting together with the community, I've talked about asking for their advice. You must have realized that my focus, my emphasis through this course is to highlight what I'm really concerned about in this course is to highlight the impact of the feedback from the community on our policy decisions. So let's discuss what these feedback loops do when we deal with social problems. The feedback loops are seen as the underlying structure of dynamic behavior. Whatever we do is influenced by how we have experienced the same situation in the past, or some aspect of the situation in the past. So they form the structure of our ongoing behavior. Feedback loops have been identified as responsible for the counterintuitive behavior, and policy resistance observed in real social systems. Policies are implemented, but unfortunately, feedback is not taken as to how that implementation served the community or did not serve the community, or what changes could have been made to the policy. So people become wary. Okay, so feedback loops have been, so if the feedback loop is not used, is not utilized to the fullest extent possible, people feel uncomfortable about some policy decisions. The way people respond to policy decisions is dependent on the effectiveness of the feedback loop. If the feedback loop is utilized properly, the policy becomes more acceptable. Any policy that is implemented in a particular region becomes more acceptable to the people in that region. On the other hand, if feedback is not taken from the community or is not utilized the way it was promised to be utilized, people become wary. People do not either, they realize that their feedback will not be sought, or they realize that whatever they say, the implementers will do exactly as they please, so they become uncomfortable with giving feedback. Okay. Feedback loops and the notion of loop dominance provide an intuitive and accessible description of mathematical models created to study the behavior of complex systems. So there are researchers who have quantified the feedback loops, the way the feedback loops function, and they form the basis. Repetitive patterns that are observed through these feedback loops then become the basis for quantification of these processes. Feedback loops enable the creation of self-contained theory where patterns of dynamic behavior, it should be patterns, I've made a spelling mistake there, where patterns of dynamic behavior are understood as consequences of the internal structure of causally closed systems. So, when we see repetitive patterns in the feedback loops, we realize that there is an ongoing cause and effect sort of loop within that society, within that system, and this is the patterns of dynamic behavior are understood as consequences of the internal structure of causally closed systems in any community. By looking at the feedback loop, we can find out what is causing what. Especially these patterns are very clearly indicative of what the cause is and how that cause affects, or what is the effect of a particular activity or some factor, and that can be quantified, that can be studied to improve the situation in any society, especially in closed social systems where external influences are not that many, or where the system is resistant to or reluctant to let outside influences affect it. At that point, these loops become very helpful for us in identifying these cause and effect relationships within that system. Okay, some stages and steps in model development. The first stage in this model development, where we can actually quantify these feedback loop and use it to develop theory that will help in the policy making, and that will help in policy implementation and eventually sustainable development efforts, is the first stage is problem. Problem would be and the steps in this are definition of time horizon, when did the problem start, how long has it going on, etc. And then define the time horizon, identify reference modes. So, what is the problem related to, how do we know it is a problem, define the level of aggregation, what is it related to, how is it a problem, who considers it a problem, etc. Define the system boundaries, where all is the problem spread, who sees it as a problem, where, what is the who is being affected by this problem, how far is the problem spreading. Then comes the conceptualization. We establish relevant variables, we map relationships between the factors affecting the problem, we identify the feedback loops, we generate dynamic hypotheses. These are the steps. So, we first establish the factors affecting the problem, then we find out how these variables are connected to each other, then we identify the feedback loops and we find out how these feedback loops are informing us about the variables and the problem that is being affected, and then we generate hypotheses to solve the problem using the information that we get from feedback loops. Then we formulate mathematical equations, because the patterns have become very visible to us and they are more or less consistent. That's why we call them patterns. Then we develop mathematical equations, we quantify the parameters, then we analyze the model for logical values, we conduct sensitivity analyses, we validate the model, and then we conduct, then the last stage is policy analysis. We formulate a policy, we conduct policy experiments, and we evaluate the policy experiments. Now, for steps 3, 4 and 5, I think for more details on how models are developed in social situations, maybe you might want to go through a course on statistical techniques or quantitative techniques for social research, and that would give you much more information, but going into those details is beyond the scope of this course. So, I just wanted to show you one more method that we can use to assess or to deal with problems of sustainable development, and that is where we will stop as far as this lecture is concerned. This is one more way, because the purpose of this course is to show you in how many ways we can approach the problem of sustainable development using strategic communication as a tool for dealing with the issue of sustainable development. So, this is what I wanted to show you. Thank you very much for listening.